Hey there, writers. You'd never guess it, but the best thing you can do for your writing is to write.
Don't adjust those dials, folks. There's more obviousness with Andrew coming up right now.
No, it is obvious, but it's the kind of obvious that I think a lot of us overlook because it is so obvious. But in all the reading and thinking about writing that I've done this year, it's a line from Dinty Moore's book, Crafting the Personal Essay, that's been stuck in my head. The essayist does not sit down at her desk already knowing all of the right answers, because if she did, there would be no reason to write. And this is what I'm really getting at. I run into writers all the time, including, whenever I look into a mirror, who do a lot of writing adjacent things in the name of optimizing their writing without actually doing the writing. I mean, we plan and fret and talk about our projects more than we actually work on them, and even though we think it will make the project better, it could end up doing more harm than good. We try, in other words, to set up the conditions so that we can sit at our desk knowing all the answers, but we forget that that's neither possible nor, frankly, desirable. You know, a semester just ended, and almost without fail, there's a student or two in every class who has every reason to succeed, but who ends up with a very avoidable F. As they tell me, they want their papers to be perfect, so they sit and stew and plan and ponder and then never actually turn anything in. And that failure is avoidable because I'm not expecting them to turn in something perfect. At the start of the semester, I'm only asking them really to turn in some rough brainstorm nonsense that then we work together to refine into a great project. All I want them to do is start. But they don't even do that because they're so concerned about not being able to finish. They want all the answers before they sit at their desk. But if they did that, there would, as Dinty Moore says, be no reason at all to write. Because here's the thing, you can't, on a basic level, know what you're writing about until you've written it. Or as the essayist Philip Lopate describes it, you follow out a strand of curiosity, and pretty soon you've got an interesting digression, a whole chapter, a book proposal, a book. That strand of curiosity never develops into a digression unless you're writing. You don't plan a book, you write one.
Oh, says the guy with a long public record of advocating for planning and outlining. Maybe we should actually call it self-contradiction with Andrew.
No, planning is important when it's productive. But planning isn't a replacement for writing. There are some things we can only learn when we're actually writing the words. To borrow from the linguist A.L. Becker, we don't distinguish birds until we learn their names and hear their songs. Up to that point, we hear birds around us, and then we begin to pick up their particularity along with the language. Particularity is something we achieve. Before you've experienced them repeatedly and over time, you just hear the ambience of birdsong. But by actually spending time outside and observing birds in action, you come to distinguish different songs from each other and then, eventually, to associate those unique calls with specific birds. When all you do is plan and outline and talk about whatever you're writing, you're experiencing your project as birdsong in general. When you're actually writing sentences, though, you're spending time with the birds and learning their particular songs. You achieve particularity, a real, meaningful, and detailed knowledge of your project, but you only do it by spending actual time on it. Or put more straightforwardly, there are just some problems you can't solve in advance. There are some things you can only figure out by actually writing the thing. If you haven't had the chance to see the very many drafts that the poet Elizabeth Bishop went through in writing her poem One Art, you're missing out on a prime demonstration of seeing a writer solve their creative problems by actually writing a piece. I'll link to a version of the drafts in the description, but as a general overview, Bishop's poem One Art is one of the most celebrated villanelles in the language. Now, a villanelle is a demanding poetic form that involves intricately interwoven repetition and more, and as a result of that, a lot of villanelles end up falling flat. But if you skim through Bishop's drafts, you can see that it didn't start out as a villanelle. It started out as some scraps of language and ideas about losing things. Some drafts are much longer, some are much shorter, some are even illegible, but it's not until over a dozen drafts that the piece even starts to look like a villanelle. So what's my point? Well, Bishop didn't sit down with the whole piece figured out. She didn't set out to write a villanelle, spend a half hour at her desk, and then produce one of the greatest ones that we know. She just started writing. And in the writing of it, that villanelle emerged. She found the answers the only way she could in the process of writing. But writing with Andrew, I write fiction, and all you've done is quote essayists and poets. What about me? Fear not, friend. This advice is widely generalizable. Take it from the novelist Anne Lamott. Very few writers really know what they are doing until they've done it. In fact, it's not just true for poets and essayists and novelists either. I don't care how much study and training you've done to learn how to teach. I think there are some things that you just cannot know until you're in a classroom looking in the eyes of a room full of students. When I was a student in poetry school, I kept a quote from Robert Frost's essay, The Figure a Poem Makes, on my computer screen. A poem may be worked over once it is in being, but may not be worried into being. And why did I keep it on my screen so that I saw it all the time? Because I am very good at worrying and hoping that all that worrying will create something. But worrying isn't writing, and you can only revise drafts, not worries. A poem or essay, or yes, even a work of fiction, believe it or not, can be worked over once you've brought it into being, once you've actually written it. But you cannot worry it into being, or outline it into being, or talk with your classmates about it in the hallway into being. So that's what I mean when I say that the best thing you can do for your writing is to actually write. Because while theory and planning and worrying and talking about a project all have their place in the process, none of them are writing. And there are some creative answers you can only find through the actual work of writing. Just imagine what we would have missed out on if Elizabeth Bishop had tried to worry her villanelle into being, instead of just writing and writing and rewriting draft after draft until those ideas finally coalesced into a villanelle. And then just imagine how much better off we'll all be if you actually write and let the process of writing reveal to you what your project really is. There really are some things that you just can't know until you've actually done them. So dive in, grab a pencil or a keyboard or whatever you write with or on, and just write. There really is no substitute for just doing the thing. You don't need the answers before you sit down to write, and really you can't even have the answers until you sit down to write. Truly, you can work your project over once it exists, but you cannot worry it into being. So just get started, even now at the end of the year, and we'll see you again real soon.